A lonely, crying boy is abandoned on a frozen road, but when a polar bear finds him, something unbelievable happens that changes both of their lives forever. What follows will leave you speechless. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The cold wind howled through the barren landscape, carrying a biting chill that seemed to freeze everything in its path. The sky was a dull, overcast gray, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow that stretched for miles. The trees were bare, their branches twisted and gnarled like the hands of old, forgotten giants reaching out into the empty sky. The world was silent, the kind of silence that made everything feel still and frozen in time. There was nothing but the endless white snow and the cold wind sweeping through the air. It felt like no one had been here in years, like no one had dared to come to this desolate place. In the middle of this cold and lifeless scene, a large, white shape moved slowly through the snow. A polar bear, his thick fur almost blending into the snow around him, walked with steady, heavy steps. His massive paws sunk deep into the soft snow with every step, leaving tracks that seemed to disappear into the distance behind him. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon as he moved, always alert, always on the lookout for something, food, danger, or perhaps something else that he didn't fully understand. The polar bear had lived in these frozen lands for as long as he could remember. The icy cold had always been a part of his world. The endless snow and wind were as familiar to him as the fur on his back. He knew the ways of the land, the rhythms of the cold, and the patterns of the animals that lived here. His life had always been solitary, spent roaming the vast emptiness in search of food and survival. He was strong, built for the harsh conditions of the frozen north, and his thick fur kept him warm even in the most bitter winds. He had never known anything else, never questioned why he was here or what his purpose was. The world was simply a cold, empty place, and he was just another creature living in it. Today, however, something felt different. The air was strange, heavier than usual. There was something in the wind that didn't belong. The bear's sharp senses told him that there was something, or someone, out there, hidden just beyond his sight. He paused for a moment, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air, trying to catch a scent. There was something faint, something odd, but it was hard to place. It was a human scent, one he had smelled before, but it didn't quite fit into the world he knew. The polar bear's curiosity tugged at him. He was used to being alone, but he wasn't completely indifferent to the presence of others. Sometimes, he would come across a seal or a whale carcass, or perhaps a fellow polar bear, and while he usually kept to himself, he couldn't ignore the pull of something new, something different. He wasn't sure why, but something about this scent felt important. He followed the faint trail, moving silently through the snow, his powerful legs pushing him forward with each step. His instincts guided him, urging him to go farther, to follow the unknown trail that seemed to lead him toward something. He had no idea what he would find, but he couldn't stop himself from seeking it out. The forest, the trees, the vast snow-covered landscape, none of it made sense to him now. There was only the trail, and the urge to follow it, wherever it might lead. After what felt like hours, the polar bear finally came to a small clearing, and there, lying in the snow, he saw something that made his heart stop. A boy. A small child, no older than 8 or 9, was sitting alone on the side of the road. He was hunched over, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees as if trying to make himself as small as possible. His face was buried in his hands, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. The boy was wearing a thin jacket that was not nearly warm enough for the freezing temperatures, and his shoes were covered in snow. He was alone. Completely alone. The boy was so still, so quiet, that the bear wasn't sure if he was alive. The polar bear's first instinct was to turn away. He had never been one to help others, especially not humans. They were strange creatures, different from the animals he knew. They were loud, chaotic, and often dangerous. The bear had learned to keep his distance from humans, to avoid them whenever possible. But this boy was something different. He didn't make sense. Why was he here, all alone in the middle of this frozen wasteland? The polar bear hesitated, standing still in the snow, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to do. He had never been in a situation like this before. What did it mean to help a human? He didn't know. He had never had to think about it. He had always been on his own, living by his instincts, surviving by himself. And yet, something about the boy's small, trembling form, sitting all alone in the cold, made the bear's heart ache in a way he couldn't explain. The boy's sobs grew louder, and the bear's curiosity got the best of him. He stepped closer, moving cautiously, his large body making almost no sound as he approached. The boy didn't seem to notice him, lost in his own world of pain and fear. The bear stopped just a few feet away, watching him carefully. He wasn't sure what to do next. Should he make a sound? Should he try to comfort the boy? He didn't know how to do that. The boy finally looked up, his tear-streaked face staring directly into the bear's eyes. For a moment, there was complete silence. The boy's eyes widened in shock and fear as he saw the massive creature standing in front of him. His body stiffened, and his mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. The bear didn't move, didn't growl or show his teeth. He just stood there, watching the boy with a calm, steady gaze. The boy's fear was palpable, and the bear could see it in the way his body trembled. But there was something else in the boy's eyes, too, something that the bear had never seen before. It was a kind of desperation, a longing for something. The boy wasn't just scared of the bear. He was scared of something deeper. Something that went beyond the fear of a wild animal. The boy was scared of being alone. The bear, sensing this, took a small step forward, lowering his massive body slightly so that he wasn't as intimidating. He watched the boy closely, trying to understand what was happening. The boy didn't move, still frozen in place, staring at the bear with wide, tearful eyes. He didn't run away, didn't scream for help. He simply stared, his breathing ragged and uneven. The polar bear took another step closer, his large paw making a soft crunch in the snow. The boy flinched, but still, he didn't move. Slowly, cautiously, the bear lowered his head, his eyes never leaving the boy. He wasn't sure why, but there was a strange pull in his chest, a feeling that he couldn't ignore. The boy needed help. The boy needed something the bear could provide. And so, the bear did the only thing he knew to do. He sat down. Slowly and carefully, he lowered his body to the ground, sitting just a few feet away from the boy. He wasn't sure if the boy would understand, but he hoped that by sitting there, he could show the boy that he wasn't a threat. He wasn't going to hurt him. He wasn't going to leave him alone. The boy blinked, his eyes still wide with disbelief. He hadn't expected the bear to do anything like this. He had expected the bear to be like the others he had heard about in stories, fierce, dangerous, ready to attack. But this bear was different. He wasn't like the stories. This bear wasn't attacking him. He was just sitting there, watching him, waiting. And in that moment, something shifted in the boy's heart. He didn't know why, but he felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Maybe the world wasn't as cold and cruel as it seemed. Maybe, in this strange and unbelievable moment, he had found something he hadn't even known he needed. A companion. A protector. The boy wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so lost. The polar bear's massive paws sank into the snow with each step as he moved closer to the boy. His body was large, and his thick, white furs seemed to blend into the snowy world around him. He walked slowly, carefully, making sure not to make any sudden movements that might startle the child. The boy, sitting alone on the side of the road, didn't notice the bear at first. His small body was hunched over, his face hidden in his hands as he wept. The air around him was bitterly cold, and the snow drifted gently from the sky, making everything look soft and white. But the boy didn't see the beauty of the snow. All he saw was his pain, and the emptiness he felt inside. The bear, sensing the boy's distress, stopped a few feet away. His sharp brown eyes watched the child carefully. The boy's sobs were quiet but desperate, and the bear could feel the sadness in the air. The road was long and empty, stretching on in both directions. No one else was around, and there was no sound except for the wind and the boy's quiet crying. The bear tilted his head slightly, watching the boy. He had no idea why the child was here, alone in the cold, but he felt a deep urge to help. He had seen many things in the wilderness, both beautiful and terrifying, but he had never seen anything like this. A child, so small and vulnerable, sitting in the middle of a vast, frozen landscape. It didn't make sense. Bears were known to roam the wilderness, but this one was different. He wasn't just a wild animal. He had a deep, unspoken connection to the world around him. The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his jacket. His clothes were thin and torn in places, not enough to keep him warm in this cold world. His small fingers trembled, and his face was streaked with tears. He looked lost, alone in a way that no child should ever feel. He didn't even notice the polar bear standing just a few feet away from him, watching quietly. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Finally, the bear took a step forward, his large paw leaving an imprint in the snow. The sound was soft but loud enough to make the boy's head snap up. He froze, his wide eyes locking onto the bear's large figure. The boy's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen an animal so big, so white, and so close. His first instinct was to run, to escape, but his legs felt weak. He couldn't move. He had no energy left to run, no strength to fight. The bear's eyes, however, weren't filled with the anger the boy expected. Instead, they were soft, warm, and curious. The polar bear lowered his head slightly, as if trying to show the boy that he meant no harm. His large body moved gently, and he took another step forward. The boy couldn't move. He could only stare at the bear, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. For a moment, everything was still. The snow continued to fall around them, the world around them silent except for the gentle sounds of the bear's breathing and the boy's shaky sobs. The boy didn't know what to do. The world felt so empty, and here was this huge, powerful animal, watching him with eyes that seemed to understand. He wanted to scream, to run, but something about the bear made him stay still. The boy could feel the warmth that radiated from the bear's body, even though the world around him was so cold. The bear took another step forward, moving closer to the boy. The boy swallowed hard, his throat tight with fear, but he didn't run. There was something about the bear that made him feel safe in a way he didn't understand. He had always been told to be afraid of animals like bears. They were wild, they were dangerous, and they could hurt you. But this bear didn't look dangerous. He looked kind. The boy didn't know how to explain it, but he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The boy finally spoke, his voice shaky and quiet. What do you want from me?" His words were barely a whisper, carried away by the wind, but the bear seemed to hear him just fine. The bear tilted his head, as if considering the boy's words. The boy wasn't sure what he expected from the animal. Would the bear roar? Would he attack? Would he chase the boy away? The world around him seemed so empty, and he couldn't understand why the bear had come. The bear didn't answer the boy's question. Instead, he sat down on the cold ground, his large body sinking into the snow. He looked at the boy with his deep, dark eyes, his body still and calm. It was as if the bear was saying, "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here." The boy didn't know what to do with that. How could an animal, something so big and strong, just sit there like that? How could he feel so calm in the presence of something so wild? The boy, still shivering from the cold and fear, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He felt weak. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, crying, alone on the side of the road. His mind was cloudy, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't remember what had happened, how he had ended up here, or why he had been left all alone. His chest felt heavy, and his heart ached with loneliness. He wanted to go home. He wanted someone, anyone, to be there with him. But there was no one. No one except for the bear. As the minutes passed, the boy began to feel a strange connection to the bear. He didn't know how or why, but it was there. The bear hadn't run away. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't done anything that a normal, dangerous bear would do. Instead, he had stayed. He was watching the boy with an odd kindness in his eyes, as if waiting for something, waiting for the boy to say something or do something. The boy took a deep breath, his small chest rising and falling with each shaky inhale. He wasn't sure why, but he felt the urge to speak. Why are you here?" he whispered, his voice still weak but more steady now. He was asking the bear, but he was also asking himself. What had brought him here? Why had he been left alone in this cold, empty world? The polar bear didn't answer with words, but his gaze seemed to soften. His head tilted slightly, and he let out a low, gentle huff. It was the kind of sound a bear might make to reassure someone, or perhaps to comfort them. It was a sound that, in that moment, felt like the most comforting thing in the world. The boy didn't know what the bear was thinking, but he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. For the first time since he had been left on the side of the road, he didn't feel completely alone. He was still scared, still unsure of what was happening, but he felt something different. Something warm, something safe. The bear was here with him, and maybe, just maybe, that meant something. Maybe, for just a moment, the world wasn't as empty as it had seemed. The boy slowly took a few steps forward, his legs trembling with the cold. He stopped just a few feet away from the bear, looking up at the giant animal. The bear's eyes met his, and for a moment, the boy felt as though they were communicating without words. He didn't know how, but he felt it. It was as if the bear was telling him, "I'm not going to leave you." The boy sat down in the snow, his legs feeling like jelly, and he wrapped his arms around his knees. The cold bit at his skin, but he didn't care. The bear was there, and that made everything feel a little less scary. It didn't make sense, but in that moment, it didn't have to. The boy wasn't alone anymore. The polar bear, with his calm presence and soft eyes, had somehow filled the emptiness that had been growing inside him. As the snow continued to fall around them, the boy closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the fear, the loneliness, the sadness. But with the bear by his side, the weight didn't feel as heavy. It felt like, maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. Maybe the road ahead wouldn't be so long and lonely after all. The boy sat on the cold, snowy road, his body shaking with each sob. His hands were pressed to his face, trying to stop the tears, but they kept coming. He didn't know how long he had been out here, minutes, hours, maybe even days. Time felt strange when you were alone, when no one cared enough to come looking for you. The world around him was quiet, except for the sound of the wind and the distant howl of a wolf. The snow continued to fall in thick flakes, covering the ground, making the world look white and empty. He couldn't remember how he got here. All he knew was that he had been abandoned. Left behind. His chest felt tight every time he thought about it. His parents were supposed to love him. They were supposed to take care of him. But they didn't. They had just driven away, leaving him behind without a second glance. How could they do that? He wasn't even sure what he had done wrong. Had he been bad? Had he disappointed them? The tears kept falling, and he didn't know how to stop them. He felt so small, so helpless. Every breath he took seemed colder than the last, and his stomach growled with hunger. He wanted to call out to someone, anyone, but there was no one here. Just the endless snow, the long stretch of road, and the silence that made everything feel so much worse. The boy didn't know how long he sat there, but it felt like forever. The wind howled, the snow piled up around him, and still, no one came. He was starting to wonder if he would ever see another person again. Maybe he would just freeze here, alone, forgotten by the world. Maybe this was how his story would end. But then, something happened. The wind shifted. The boy looked up, blinking through the snowflakes that stung his eyes. In the distance, he saw something moving. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, just a shadow among the trees. But no, it was real. It was something big, huge, even. His heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively shrank back, afraid of whatever was coming toward him. The figure grew larger and larger, and the boy's eyes widened in disbelief. It was a bear. A massive, white polar bear, walking slowly through the snow toward him. The boy's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen a polar bear before, not like this. He had heard stories about them, but he never thought he would see one in real life, let alone be this close to one. His heart raced as the bear drew nearer. The boy knew that polar bears were dangerous, wild animals. They were strong and fast, and they could kill a person in seconds if they wanted to. His first instinct was to run, to get up and run as fast as he could, but his legs felt too weak to move. His body was too cold, too tired, and he was too scared to move at all. The bear was so big, so powerful. There was no way he could outrun it. The boy stared at the bear, his heart pounding in his chest. What was it doing here? Was it hungry? Was it going to attack him? But instead of charging at him, the bear slowed its pace, coming to a stop about 10 feet away. It just stood there, looking at the boy with its dark, intelligent eyes. The bear's breathing was slow and steady, like it was trying to decide what to do. The boy froze, unsure of what was happening. He had been taught to fear bears. Everyone knew bears were dangerous. But this one didn't seem angry. It didn't seem to want to hurt him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the boy and the bear. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he couldn't look away. There was something in the bear's gaze, something that made him feel safe, in a way. The boy didn't know how to explain it, but he didn't feel like the bear was going to hurt him. He felt like the bear was trying to understand him, like it was curious about him, just as he was curious about it. The bear took another step closer, and the boy's heart leapt in his chest. His breath caught in his throat, and he instinctively shrank back, pressing himself into the snow, as if he could somehow disappear. But the bear didn't lunge at him. It didn't growl or snarl. It just moved closer, slowly, carefully, until it was sitting down right beside him. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. The bear was huge, but it wasn't attacking. It was just sitting there, its massive body resting on the cold ground. It was so close that the boy could feel the heat radiating off the bear's fur, a warmth that was almost too good to be true. The boy didn't know what to do. Should he run? Should he scream? Should he push the bear away? But as he sat there, he realized that the bear wasn't going to hurt him. It wasn't acting like a dangerous animal. It wasn't snarling or showing its teeth. It was just sitting there, waiting. The boy's heart began to slow down, and for the first time since he had been left on the road, he didn't feel so alone. The bear's presence was strange, comforting even. He could feel the warmth of the bear's body next to him, and something in his chest relaxed. He didn't know why, but for the first time, he didn't feel so afraid. After a long moment, the boy finally spoke, his voice small and shaky. Are you going to hurt me?" he asked, his words barely audible above the wind. The bear didn't respond with words, of course. Bears couldn't talk. But the boy could see it in the bear's eyes. The bear wasn't there to hurt him. It wasn't there to attack. It was just there, keeping him company in the snow. The boy took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt a strange sense of peace. The world around him was still cold and harsh, but here, with the bear beside him, it felt a little less lonely. A little less scary. The boy looked up at the sky, his eyes searching the endless expanse of gray clouds. He didn't know where he was, or why he was here, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't completely alone anymore. Not with the bear by his side. For a while, neither of them moved. The bear sat quietly beside him, watching the snow fall gently around them. The boy couldn't help but feel a little safer, a little warmer. The bear wasn't a person. It couldn't talk or offer him food, but it was still there, offering a kind of comfort he didn't expect. The boy closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let the wind blow through his hair. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to survive. The polar bear sat still, watching the boy closely. His large white form towered over the small child, who, though frightened at first, now seemed to sense something different. There was no growling, no threat in the bear's posture, only calm, steady presence. The wind howled around them, but in this moment, the world seemed to stand still. The boy, though cold and alone just moments before, now found himself facing an animal that, in its own way, seemed to understand his loneliness. It was hard to believe. Could a bear really feel the same pain? The boy's name was Liam. He had been abandoned, left alone in the cold, empty landscape with nothing but his thin jacket and the dim hope that someone might come for him. But no one had come. He didn't know how long he had been sitting by the side of the road, hours, maybe longer. He had been crying, calling out, hoping that somehow his parents might return, but the road remained empty. The trees around him seemed to be closing in, their dark shapes making the world feel even smaller and more alone. His tears had dried, but the emptiness remained. When the bear had appeared, Liam didn't know what to think. He had heard stories about animals in the wild, how they could be dangerous and scary. But this bear was different. Instead of attacking him or running away, it had sat down, watching him, as if waiting for him to understand that it meant no harm. The boy hadn't moved at first, too frightened to even think. But then the bear nudged the air with its nose, and the boy realized it wasn't a threat. It was just there. Liam took a hesitant step closer. His legs felt weak from sitting for so long, but he forced himself to move, his small feet crunching in the snow. He couldn't help but wonder why this bear, this huge creature, had found him. Was it just by chance, or had it somehow known he needed help? The bear looked at him quietly, its deep brown eyes filled with something Liam couldn't quite name. The boy stopped a few steps away and stared back at the bear. For a long time, neither of them moved. It was almost like they were trying to figure each other out. Liam had been afraid at first, but now, something else started to take over. Was it hope? Maybe. The bear wasn't like any other creature Liam had seen before. It wasn't attacking him, or even growling. It was just there. And somehow, that was enough. Liam hesitated for a moment longer, then took another step. This time, he reached out slowly, his small hand trembling slightly. The bear didn't move away. It didn't growl or swipe at him. Instead, it sat still, its massive form so powerful yet so gentle. Liam's fingers brushed against the bear's fur, soft but thick. The texture was different from anything he had ever felt before, and it surprised him. How could something so big feel so calm? He gently ran his fingers through the bear's fur, taking in the feeling of warmth that radiated from the creature's body. The bear, sensing the boy's touch, lowered its head slightly, as if to invite him closer. Liam's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange feeling he couldn't quite explain. Could he trust this bear? Was it safe to be this close to an animal that could so easily hurt him? The more he thought about it, the more he realized he wasn't afraid anymore. The bear's quiet strength was somehow comforting. It was as if, for the first time since he had been left alone on the road, Liam wasn't completely alone. There was someone, right beside him, offering protection without asking for anything in return. Why did they leave me? Liam whispered, more to himself than to the bear. His voice cracked with the weight of his question, and the tears that had been slowly fading returned, streaming down his cheeks. The cold didn't seem so bad now, but the ache in his chest was unbearable. He didn't understand why his parents had left him here, all alone. He had been so sure they would come back, but as the hours passed, the hope had slowly faded. The bear didn't respond, of course. It didn't have the words to say. But something about its presence made Liam feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, feeling embarrassed. The bear watched him patiently, waiting for him to calm down. Liam didn't feel like he had to explain himself to the bear. In fact, he felt a strange sense of peace as the giant animal simply sat there, offering no judgment, no demands. Liam took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The wind had picked up again, swirling the snow around them, but he felt the warmth of the bear's presence beside him. It was strange how comforting that warmth felt. Maybe the bear wasn't so different from him after all. He had been abandoned, too, hadn't he? He was a creature of the wild, living in a world that didn't always care about him. Maybe, in some way, the bear understood what it was like to be alone. The boy sat down in the snow, his legs numb from the cold, but his heart was strangely calm. He looked up at the polar bear and spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to get home," he admitted, feeling the weight of the words settle deep in his chest. The boy had no idea where he was. He had wandered for hours, or maybe longer, with no sense of direction, no idea which way to go. He had no idea if anyone was out there looking for him. The bear didn't answer, but Liam didn't expect it to. What could the bear say? But there was something in the way the bear stayed with him, something in its calm, watchful eyes, that made Liam feel like maybe he wasn't completely lost. Maybe the bear wasn't just protecting him from the cold and the snow. Maybe the bear was helping him in a way he couldn't understand. Maybe, somehow, this creature, this massive polar bear, had shown up for him when no one else had. And even though the boy couldn't explain it, he was beginning to believe that it might be enough for now. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The boy wasn't sure what would happen next. Would someone come for him? Would the bear leave? He didn't know, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam felt something he hadn't felt before: hope. It wasn't the loud, bright kind of hope he had imagined before, but it was enough to make him feel like maybe things wouldn't always be so bad. Maybe, even in the cold, even in the lonely moments, there could be someone to share the silence with him. Liam rested his head against the bear's side, the fur soft beneath his cheek. The snow kept falling, thick and heavy, but the boy felt warmer now. He wasn't sure if it was the bear's presence or just the simple fact that he didn't have to face the world alone anymore, but either way, it didn't matter. For this moment, he wasn't abandoned. For this moment, the bear was his protector, and in some strange way, that was enough. The night stretched on, and Liam closed his eyes, his breath slow and steady. He wasn't sure where he would end up, but for now, he wasn't thinking about the cold or the pain or the fear of being alone. He only thought about the bear and the strange comfort he felt lying next to this huge creature. Maybe things would be okay, he thought, even if just for tonight. And for the first time in a long time, the boy fell asleep without fear, tucked safely beside his unlikely companion. The boy's hands shook as he wiped his eyes, still not fully able to believe the scene before him. The polar bear, who had appeared so suddenly on that cold, lonely road, sat calmly beside him. The boy had never seen anything like it in his life. The bear's white fur blended into the snow, and yet it seemed to glow with warmth, as though it carried with it a feeling of safety that no one had ever shown him before. He had been abandoned. He had no idea why or how it had happened. One moment, he had been in the car with his parents, and the next, they were gone, his heartbroken cries swallowed by the endless stretch of snow and ice. There had been no warning, no explanation. They had simply left, and he was here alone. So many thoughts had rushed through his mind in those long, empty hours. Was it his fault? Had he done something wrong? Why did they leave him? The polar bear, of all creatures, seemed to understand. The boy couldn't quite explain it, but when he looked into the bear's eyes, something softened inside him. The fear that had once gripped his heart slowly began to ease. The bear's eyes weren't angry or harsh, they were gentle, like the soft glow of moonlight against the snowy landscape. The boy found himself leaning against the bear's massive side, drawn to him by some deep, quiet comfort that the child hadn't realized he'd been missing. The bear didn't try to speak to him. He didn't need to. It was as though the bear understood that words weren't necessary right now. He just sat there, strong and steady, his presence alone offering the boy something he hadn't known he needed. Protection. Understanding. Comfort. For the first time since being left on that cold road, the boy didn't feel so alone. He looked up at the bear's large, soft face, noticing the small details that he had missed before. The way the bear's breath came out in small clouds, like tiny puffs of smoke against the chill in the air. How his fur, despite the cold, seemed warm and soft to the touch. It was comforting in a way that the boy couldn't explain. It wasn't just the warmth of the bear's body that kept him safe, it was the way the bear's presence calmed the storm inside his chest. The boy didn't cry anymore. His tears had stopped, replaced by a quiet stillness. He hadn't realized how much he had needed to feel safe, to feel like there was someone watching out for him. There had been so many times before when he had wished for someone, anyone, to protect him. But now, here he was with a creature that he had been taught to fear. And yet, this bear didn't seem frightening at all. The boy shifted closer to the bear, his small hand lightly resting against the thick fur. He could feel the warmth radiating from the bear's body, and it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The boy's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. He had been abandoned by the people he loved. His world had suddenly turned upside down, and he was left to face it all alone. But now, with the bear beside him, something inside him felt different. It was as if the bear was saying, "I'm here. I won't leave you." The snow around them continued to swirl, the wind biting at their skin, but the boy didn't mind it anymore. For the first time since everything had gone wrong, he felt safe. Not just from the cold, but from the fears and doubts that had clouded his mind. He had no idea where he was, or how long it would take to get home. But for now, that didn't matter. He had the bear beside him, and somehow that was enough. The boy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the silence settle around them. "Thank you," he whispered softly. It was the only thing he could think to say, though it felt too small for everything he felt. But the bear didn't respond with words. Instead, he shifted slightly, wrapping his body a little closer around the boy, like a protective shield. The boy smiled faintly, his heart swelling with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He had been afraid. Terrified, in fact. But now, with the bear by his side, that fear was starting to fade. The boy didn't know why this huge bear had chosen to stay with him. He didn't know what had brought the bear to him or how long they would be together. But for now, the boy understood something important. This was not just some random creature passing by. This bear had chosen to stay, chosen to offer what little comfort he could. And that made the boy feel like, just maybe, there was hope for him after all. A loud growl suddenly broke the stillness. The boy's heart jumped, and he looked up, startled. The bear's ears perked, and he stood up, his posture alert. The boy quickly stood as well, his eyes scanning the road. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. What was that noise? It had sounded almost like a warning, or maybe something even more dangerous. The bear moved in front of the boy, blocking him from whatever might be coming. His large, powerful body was positioned between the boy and whatever threat lay ahead, as though telling the boy to stay back. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, fear creeping back into his bones. Was it another animal? Something even bigger? His mind raced, but he didn't dare take a step forward. The growl came again, louder this time. It wasn't from the bear standing before him, it was from somewhere further down the road. The boy could hear something heavy moving through the snow. He could almost feel the vibrations in the ground beneath his feet. Whatever it was coming closer. The boy felt the pit in his stomach deepen, and he instinctively took a small step back, pressing himself against the bear. The bear growled again, low and rumbling, a warning sound that made the boy's heart race even faster. But the bear didn't back down. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stood his ground, watching the road intently, ready to defend the boy no matter what. And then, just as suddenly as the growl had started, it stopped. The boy blinked, unsure of what was happening. His breath came quickly as he strained his ears to listen. Had the danger gone? Was it over? A shape appeared at the edge of the road, emerging from the swirling snow. The boy squinted, trying to make out the figure. It was another animal, much larger than the bear standing before him. But this one wasn't white. This animal had dark fur, and it moved with the confidence of something used to being the biggest, most fearsome creature around. The boy's stomach flipped. It was a wolf. The polar bear didn't move, still standing between the boy and the wolf, his large body like a wall. The wolf stopped a few feet away, its eyes narrowing as it steadied the two of them. It was clear that the wolf wasn't sure what to make of the polar bear. But the bear didn't back down. He didn't step aside. For a long, tense moment, the three of them stood there, the wolf on one side, the boy and the polar bear on the other. The boy could feel the fear creeping up his spine. The wolf was much smaller than the polar bear, but its eyes held something dangerous, something wild that made the boy's breath catch in his throat. Then, with a sudden movement, the wolf turned and vanished into the snow. It didn't attack, didn't make any more noise, it just disappeared as quickly as it had come. The boy blinked in confusion. What had just happened? He hadn't been sure if the wolf had been ready to fight, or if it was simply sizing up the situation. But whatever it was, the polar bear had stood firm, protecting him from whatever danger might have been there. The boy looked up at the bear, who stood as still and strong as ever. His heart was still pounding, but he couldn't help the small, grateful smile that tugged at his lips. The bear had kept him safe once again. The world seemed to go quiet once more, the danger having passed, but the boy felt something inside him settle. The polar bear had not only offered him warmth and safety from the cold, but also protection from the dangers of the wilderness itself. And for the first time since his world had fallen apart, the boy knew he was not truly alone. The boy took a deep breath and sat back down on the snow, leaning against the bear once more. The bear shifted slightly, as though acknowledging him. The boy smiled again, his heart swelling with emotion. He wasn't alone anymore. Not as long as the bear was by his side. The wind howled through the barren, snow-covered landscape, making everything feel cold and distant. The sky above was a pale gray, almost as if the clouds themselves had been painted in sadness. The boy, still sitting on the side of the road, shivered violently, his small hands pressed against his arms, trying to protect himself from the freezing air. His clothes were too thin for such cold, and his feet had been numb for what felt like hours. He didn't know how long he had been there, but the world around him felt endless and empty. Through the swirling snow, the polar bear remained close by, his huge body a comforting presence in the cold, icy world. The boy had never imagined he would find comfort in such a creature, especially one so large and powerful. But now, with the bear sitting protectively beside him, the fear and sadness that had gripped him earlier started to fade, even if just a little. There was something calming about the bear's steady presence. It wasn't just his size or strength that made the boy feel safe, it was the bear's quiet patience. It felt as though the bear understood something the boy could not express. The boy looked up at the bear, his face still streaked with tears, but there was a shift in his eyes, a flicker of something different. The bear's large, brown eyes looked back at him, steady and calm. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence between them growing softer, as if it was meant to be this way. The boy couldn't explain it, but he felt like he wasn't alone anymore. He had spent so long feeling abandoned, as though no one cared about him. But now, here in the middle of the frozen world, the boy had found something he never expected, a companion, a protector. The boy slowly leaned against the bear's fur, allowing the warmth that radiated from the bear's body to seep into his own cold, tired body. It was strange, feeling this connection to a creature so different from him, so wild and untamed. He had always been taught that animals like this were dangerous, something to fear. But the bear had done nothing but sit beside him, offering him the only comfort in a world that had seemed so cruel. The boy closed his eyes, feeling the bear's presence and warmth, and for a few seconds, his thoughts quieted. The cold didn't feel as sharp, the hunger didn't gnaw at his stomach as much, and the fears that had ruled him for so long seemed distant, almost unreal. As the boy settled against the bear, he let out a soft sigh. His chest felt lighter, the tight knot of worry in his stomach beginning to loosen. Maybe it was the bear's gentle presence, or maybe it was just the relief of not being completely alone anymore. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there with the bear. Time seemed to have stopped, as though the world had forgotten about them, leaving just the two of them together in the snow. But that quiet moment didn't last forever. A sound broke through the stillness. The boy stiffened, his heart pounding in his chest as the noise grew louder. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. The bear immediately rose to his feet, his posture tense, his ears flicking back. The sound was coming from a distance, but it was unmistakable, the roar of an engine. The boy's pulse quickened. Could it be someone coming to help him? Or was it a threat? A part of him wanted to jump up and run toward the sound, to shout for help. But another part of him felt a deep sense of fear. What if it wasn't someone who cared? What if it was someone who meant him harm? The bear, sensing the boy's distress, stood tall beside him, his body protecting the boy from whatever was approaching. The boy looked up at the bear, unsure of what to do. The bear met his gaze and gave a low, soft growl, almost as if to reassure the boy. It was a strange, comforting sound, one that made the boy feel just a little bit safer, even as his heart raced with uncertainty. The sound of the engine grew louder, the snow crunching beneath the tires as the vehicle made its way toward them. The boy's breath hitched in his throat. His eyes were fixed on the approaching vehicle, his body tense with fear. The bear stood perfectly still, his focus never leaving the road. Whatever this was, the bear was ready. And the boy felt, in that moment, that he was ready too. There was no running anymore. The world had forced him to face this moment, and he wasn't going to back down. The car finally appeared, its headlights cutting through the snowstorm. It slowed as it neared the boy and the bear, the sound of the engine dying down as it came to a stop in front of them. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. The boy's eyes widened. It was a man, a tall man wearing a thick coat, his face covered in snow. The man looked down at the boy, his face filled with concern and confusion. "Hey there," the man called out, his voice carrying over the cold air. "What are you doing out here?" The boy stared at him, unsure of what to say. He wanted to run to the man, to beg him to take him away from this place, to end the cold and the loneliness. But his legs felt weak, and he was afraid that if he moved, the man would disappear, or worse, that he would turn away and leave him here with nothing but the bear. He glanced at the polar bear, who remained standing beside him, calm and unmoving. The man's gaze shifted from the boy to the bear. For a moment, he seemed shocked, his eyes wide. He took a cautious step back, but the bear did not react. He simply watched, his brown eyes steady and unblinking. "Is this?" The man trailed off, not sure how to finish the question. He looked at the boy, then back at the bear. The boy could see the confusion in the man's eyes, but there was something else there too, a deep, unspoken understanding. The man didn't seem scared, even though it was clear that the bear was a wild animal. The boy's mind raced. Was this someone who could help him? Someone who would take him back to safety? I need help, the boy finally managed to say, his voice shaky. "I don't know where my parents are. I was left here." The man's face softened, and he took another step forward, his eyes full of sympathy. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a radio, speaking quickly into it. "I found him. He's with a polar bear. Get the rescue team here as fast as you can." The boy's heart soared with hope, but as he heard the man's words, he felt a pang of sadness. Would they really take him back? Would they understand? Or would they think he didn't belong with the bear? The man kept his eyes on the boy. "It's okay. You're going to be safe now. We're going to get you somewhere warm." The boy nodded, but his gaze didn't leave the bear. He wasn't sure why, but he couldn't bring himself to move away from the polar bear just yet. The bear had kept him safe. The bear had protected him when no one else had. And now that someone had found him, the boy wasn't sure if he should leave the bear behind. The man seemed to understand. "You can stay with him until the team arrives. We'll make sure he's okay too." The boy smiled weakly, the tears returning to his eyes, though this time they were tears of relief. The polar bear stood beside him, a silent guardian in the midst of the storm. The boy didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. The bear had given him something no one else could: trust, protection, and hope. And that was something the boy would carry with him forever. As the man stayed by their side, waiting for the rescue team, the boy and the bear remained close, the bond between them unspoken but strong. The storm continued to rage, but inside, the boy knew that whatever happened next, he would never forget the strange, incredible day when a polar bear became his protector and friend. The boy felt the cold wind biting at his skin, but somehow, it wasn't as harsh as it had been before. The polar bear's presence was like a warm blanket, wrapping around him and blocking out the sharp sting of the snow. It was as if, for the first time since he could remember, he wasn't alone in the world. The air around him still felt empty, the vast expanse of white stretching endlessly in every direction, but here, with the bear beside him, he felt safer. He shifted a little, trying to find a more comfortable position against the bear's fur, which was thick and soft like snow itself. The boy was so tired, but he couldn't sleep. Not just yet. His mind was still racing with thoughts about what had happened to him, about the pain he had felt when he was left all alone. His parents had just disappeared from his life. They hadn't even said goodbye. He didn't know where they went or why they left him behind. He couldn't understand it, and it hurt so much. It hurt in a way that was so deep he felt it in his bones. The bear seemed to sense that the boy's mind was troubled. He shifted his weight slightly and let out a soft grunt, turning his head to look at the boy with his dark, deep eyes. The boy looked back, the tears he had fought back earlier starting to well up again. He didn't want to cry, but he couldn't help it. The more he thought about how he had been abandoned, the more his heart broke. He wanted to shout out, to scream for someone to come and take him back home, but there was no one. No one, the boy whispered, his voice small and sad. No one's ever coming back for me, are they? The bear didn't answer with words, but it didn't need to. It nudged the boy gently with his large head, as if to say, I'm here. You're not alone anymore. The boy sniffled, wiping his eyes. He didn't know how a bear could make him feel this way, calm, almost peaceful, but somehow, in the bear's company, the world seemed a little less terrifying. Maybe, just maybe, the boy wasn't so abandoned after all. Maybe he had a friend now, even if that friend was a giant polar bear. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. The snow continued to fall, covering everything in a thick, soft blanket. The boy felt the bear's steady breathing, slow and rhythmic, like a deep, comforting lullaby. He closed his eyes, letting the peaceful moment wash over him, though his mind still wandered, still weighed heavy with sadness. Suddenly, the boy heard something. It was faint at first, a soft sound carried by the wind. He sat up straighter, listening closely. The sound was coming closer, footsteps, crunching through the snow. The boy's heart skipped a beat. Was someone else out there? Was someone finally coming to help him? The bear's head shot up, its ears perked. The boy's body tensed with both excitement and fear. Could it be a rescue worker? A search team looking for him? He stood up, his legs feeling weak but determined to find out who it was. The bear, standing next to him, seemed to sense the boy's uncertainty. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. It nudged the boy gently, as if telling him to stay calm. Together, they looked out into the distance where the sound of footsteps grew louder. The boy squinted his eyes, trying to see through the thick snowstorm. His breath clouded the air, but then, just as he was about to give up, a figure appeared through the haze. It was a person, tall, wearing heavy winter gear, and carrying a large backpack. The boy's heart pounded. Was it really someone coming for him? Could it be? The figure got closer and closer until the boy could see their face. It was a man, older and kind-looking, with a weathered face and a smile that didn't seem quite as uncertain as the boy felt. The man stopped when he saw the boy, his eyes widening in surprise. But then his gaze softened as he looked at the polar bear standing protectively beside the boy. "Hey there, little one," the man called, his voice warm and friendly. What are you doing out here in the middle of the storm? The boy couldn't speak at first. His throat felt tight, as if the tears he had held back all this time were rising to the surface. But the man smiled at him kindly, and something about that smile made the boy feel a little braver. I was lost, the boy finally managed to say, his voice shaking. I don't know where my parents went. I was all alone. The man nodded, his expression understanding. It's okay. You're not alone anymore. We'll get you somewhere safe, all right? The boy's heart fluttered in his chest. Safe. That was the word he had longed to hear. He hadn't felt safe in so long, since the moment his parents had left him. He looked up at the bear, who was standing by his side, still watching the man carefully, but not moving. It was as if the bear was waiting for something that the boy couldn't understand. The man looked at the bear and raised an eyebrow, surprised by the bear's calm demeanor. That's an interesting friend you've got there. He seems like he's been looking out for you, huh? The boy nodded, his eyes full of gratitude. He kept me safe. He didn't leave me. The man crouched down, taking off his backpack. Well, we need to get out of this storm. The winds are picking up, and we don't want to risk getting caught out here. How about we get you somewhere warm? I'm sure we can find shelter nearby. The boy felt a pang of hesitation. The bear had been his only companion, his only protector in this cold, empty world. The thought of leaving him behind, even for a little while, made the boy's chest tighten. He looked at the bear, who met his gaze with those soft, brown eyes, as if telling him everything would be okay. Can he come too? The boy asked quietly, pointing to the bear. The man looked at the bear, then back at the boy. He smiled, his eyes twinkling. I don't see why not. If your friend here wants to come along, I think we can work something out. The boy's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and relief. The bear wasn't going to be left behind. Together, the three of them, man, boy, and bear, turned and began walking into the storm, the wind howling around them. The boy clutched onto the bear's thick fur, feeling its warmth as they trudged through the snow. The man led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of shelter, while the boy kept his focus on the bear, comforted by its steady presence. The journey was long and tiring, and the boy's legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but the bear was there, always beside him, steady and strong. The boy found himself beginning to believe, just for a moment, that maybe there was hope after all. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he had thought. The storm would pass. The snow would eventually stop falling, and someone would be there to help him, just like the man had said. After what felt like forever, they came upon a small cabin nestled between the trees, its windows glowing with warm light. The boy's heart skipped a beat. Was this really it? Was this where he would finally be safe? The man smiled and motioned for them to follow him inside. Come on, we're almost there. The boy took one last look at the polar bear, who was still walking beside him, its large form a comforting shadow in the fading light. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for this incredible creature who had never once left his side. The bear had kept him safe in the coldest, most desolate place, and now it seemed that the boy's journey was about to take a turn for the better. As they entered the cabin, the warmth hit the boy like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the tightness in his chest ease. The storm still raged outside, but inside, there was light, warmth, and the promise of hope. He knew that things weren't perfect, that there was still so much he had to understand about the world. But for now, he had a home, a new friend, and the incredible strength of the polar bear by his side. And for the first time in a long while, the boy smiled. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell.